Dr. West.
That's a pretty good segue into Sarah's question. So go ahead and jump in, Sarah.
I think I was, okay.
Thanks, Tara. Dr. West, thank you so much for being here. I'm looking at your platform, and you have mentioned there's several economic policies that you have on your platform. One of them is a $27 per hour federal minimum wage, and that you state that it'll increase based on your geographical area. Now, $27 per hour, don't you believe that that would put a hurt on small business owners? For example, in the state of Washington, when Washington State increased their minimum wage from, I believe, $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour, it put many small businesses out of business. They could not sustain it. So how do we federally sustain a $27 minimum wage? And also, what geographical areas would be higher than that $27 per hour? And how do you think that small business owners will be able to stay afloat paying those wages?
Appreciate the question, my dear sister. Very, very much so. That I'm thoroughly convinced that small businesses remain the fundamental engine of the economy. It's just that they are overshadowed by the indescribable power and wealth of the monopolies and the oligopolies. The monopolies and the oligopolies are sustained in part by subsidies, both in terms of their incentives to come to a city and stay there. I have a strong defense of small businesses, and I believe there ought to be significant subsidies for small businesses. Now, when I talk about regional specificity, I'm saying I live in New York, right? I live in Harlem. And as you can imagine, the cost of living in Harlem is very different than it is in Barnwell, South Carolina. I just say Barnwell because that's where the great James Brown was born. And he's always on my mind. I was doing Black Music Month, which is June this month. So that I recognize there has to be some variation. But one of the reasons why you have the consequences in the state of Washington that you talked about, I was part of that movement. I was part of the Seattle City Council that was led by my dear sister there, calling for $15 an hour. And that, of course, was viewed as revolutionary back then. What is that, about 10, 12 years ago, I think it is?
Roughly, yes.
Yes, somewhere back then. Now, of course, it's much more widely appropriated and widely followed. But if you don't follow through with significant subsidies to make sure that small businesses not only can stay in business, but that they can thrive. They can thrive. But right now, I mean, if Adam Smith, as you know, one of the great theorists of free markets, if he came back and looked at American capitalism, he said, this is not capitalism at all. This is a monopoly-centered, oligopoly-driven obsession with short-term profit, not long-term profit tied to common good that he talks about. And he was talking about there being businesses and enterprises that had intense and high competition. That's not the case when it comes to the dominant forces at the top in our economy. But you do have that competition among small businesses. And I believe that small businesses have a very important role to play. I know I shouldn't go on and on about this, but I'm glad you raised that issue.
Nick, could I ask one more quick thing, and I'll pass it back to you, Nick?
Sure. And I was going to go next, but I'll give it to Tira after that. How about that?
You know what, Nick? No, go ahead, because I know what you're going to ask. Go ahead. I'm sorry, sir.
Oh, okay, but all right, Dr. West.
Tira, is it on this specific topic?
Yes, it's on economic issues. Yes.
Okay, do that, and then I'll ask. That sounds good. Go for it.
So, Dr. West, many people feel that the U.S. is under economic stress. Let's just say right now, interest rates are high, mortgages are difficult for many people. We have a lot of debt. Inflation is not considered to be under significant control by many people. And looking at your policies, a lot of them will require, I think, the government to spend a lot of money. National free pre-K childcare, free tuition for all state and community colleges, reparations, free health care, cancellation of all student debt. These are significant expenditures. I understand that what you've said is that you're going to tax billionaires and close loopholes for oligarchs. But is that realistic? I mean, how are you going to pay for all these programs, even assuming that you could convince Congress to go forward with many of them? Thanks.
Right. No, I appreciate the question. And part of it, when it comes to taxes, is that, we could talk about increasing taxes all we want, and I certainly do. But the clever lawyers who the corporate elites are able to hire generate tax loopholes in so many different ways, not just the Cayman Islands and the tax evasion places. Was about $8 trillion around the world right now with tax evasion sites, not just the United States, but that's global. So that I believe that a significant amount of resources of what I'm talking about is the dismantling of the American empire. We need to be a nation among nations, not an empire with total dominant spectrum. And what does that mean? Well, we got over 800 military units. That's countable. We probably have many more, some of them underground. We've got special operations in 130 countries. We've got $1.2 trillion every year when you look at the military expenditures that overlap State Department, Pentagon, and so forth. And so there's got to be a massive disinvestment from military into investment when it comes to the civic side of the budget. And so you're absolutely right in terms of the austerity that the civil side usually gets, the so-called social spending side. But when it comes to wars, of course, it's the opposite of austerity.
But Dr. West, isn't 60% of the U.S. federal budget already entitlements?
It's already entitlements on the one hand, but it's also, I'm talking about the discretionary budget. And the discretionary budget is still 62 cents for every dollar that goes to military. There are significant billions and billions and billions of dollars that could be rechanneled toward the civic side, toward the social side. And yes, the entitlement programs are there, and you're absolutely right about that. But I'm convinced that there could be a kind of unleashing of the economy in a form that we've never seen before, if somehow we could create conditions under which we didn't have the domination of monopolies and oligopolies.
But Dr. West, just to kind of get some clarity on this issue here, and I'm looking down in the audience questions. You guys are asking some great questions down there in the bottom right-hand corner, and we appreciate it. It seems like when we've tried to, there have been certain cities that have tried to do, they've tried UBI, they've tried to increase handouts, and it doesn't work. It seems like it doesn't encourage people to go out and work, to get a job. You have a guaranteed paycheck, you can sit at home and do nothing. That seems to it seems to end up do more harm in the long run than good. So how do you move past that? I'm going beyond the fact that we're $35 trillion in debt and don't have the money to do this to begin with. But if we did start printing money to do that, how do you actually ensure productivity among these people and they don't just sit and suck off the government teat for the rest of their lives?
Yes, I appreciate the question, though, brother. I mean, one is that you can't do this in an isolated way, which is to say, it can't just be what you were calling a handout without also ensuring that people do have access to a job with a living wage, and a job with a living wage that allows them to live in a neighborhood that's safe, with health care that's available, with child care that's available. And of course, I've spent a lot of time, and you can imagine, in Sweden with my beloved mother-in-law who lives there, in Norway and other places that are able to do this kind of thing. You say, well, it's only 7 million, it's only 8 million, relatively homogeneous population, even given the waves of migrants that are coming in. Yes, but we're talking about principles here. We're talking about principles here. I do not believe that free handouts is the way out. No, not at all. Not at all. Now, I do believe in supporting our elderly. I do